Okay, so the next thing I wanted to cover that a lot of people have had questions about relate to MIDI clock. And some of this I would presume would actually probably be true for other similar devices, not just the Eventide H9, but many of the Strymon boxes and different things that have MIDI clock. Excuse me. I would presume that because of the things I've figured out with the ES8, there are probably other ways to accomplish what I'm doing as well. So I certainly am not claiming to be all-knowing entity about how this works, but this is what works really well for me. So as I said in one of the earlier videos, because I have two H9s, their primary uses, it's not all I use them for, but this one I primarily use for delay, and this one primarily for reverb. So because of that, and because it's in a nice place on my board, if I'm having to tap a tempo, I like to do that right here. And then use this as the source for the MIDI clock, which is set by my tapping. That sends MIDI clock to the ES8. The ES8 sends it really to every MIDI device I have. It just happens to be this is the only one that's still on my board. So as I said in an earlier video, I have a max unit and a core unit. So I renamed them instead of the numbers. This one is max, and that one, it's a joke, it's Irma. So if I go to max here, and I go to MIDI settings, sorry, I'm trying to do this from a distance. The way that I have this set up right now, if I go to MIDI clock, I don't want the input clock on, because if I did, what this puts out would confuse it. So I have that off. I've never needed the filter, so I leave it off. But I have the MIDI output clock enabled. And then on the ES8, I'm sorry, on the H9, this button can either be used to toggle presets or for tap. So to get it to change the modes, you actually hold it down. So right now, if I hit this button, it scrolls through presets, and they're loaded this way. If I want to get it into tap mode, I hold this down until it flashes, and now this becomes a tap button. And I'll show you in a few minutes. I actually have, I might as well talk about it right now. I don't want to move the camera because unfortunately my tripod broke while I was doing this video, so I'm using a music stand. But over on that side of the board, I have a JHS Unicorn, and I'll try and put a still picture in the video here. I don't use it all the time, but when I do use it, I want it to be, because it has a tap tempo, I want it to be in tempo with the rest of my board. It is a non-MIDI device though, but it has the capability to tap out. Basically, I'm able to capture the tap signal from it. So I have a TRS cable going from that to here, and basically it just mirrors this button. So I can either tap over here, and if you watch here, you'll see the tempo change, or I can tap here, and you'll see the tempo change. And if now you watch here, you'll see the tempo change here, and we'll get to this in a moment. So if like me, you have some non-MIDI and MIDI tempo related devices, this is a great way to set those up. Still use this as the MIDI clock source, but either use this as the tap input or that other device. If it's something you use all the time, then make that your primary one. For me, it's a Univibe. I don't use it all the time, and this is kind of a better place on the board for me. To make that particular part work, I had to go to the aux switch and tap tempo, make sure it's switch 1. And because I'm using an external foot switch, this particular one uses the tip. Others use the ring. You'll just have to look at your device and see how that works. Anyway, but the big thing on here was that MIDI clock is enabled. We'll go back to this screen. So the input MIDI clock I do not want on because I want this to be the source. I don't need the filter in this case, but enable the MIDI output clock. So I don't know if you can see here, but I have two MIDI cables. One is coming in and one is going out. The one that's going out goes straight here into the ES8. Now, to get the ES8 set up, this is a global thing to do. So this, I believe, is under MIDI setting. I go to enter. Now, I want MIDI to be out, and I want the sync to be auto and the clock on. Now, I'll show you in a moment what the other choices are. But as you saw just a moment ago, when I tap the tempo on here, you see it change. Now, some presets on the H9 are going to be in milliseconds no matter what you do. Let me go to one of my real presets here that has a delay. So this has a vintage delay. I'm pretty sure when I tap on this one, it'll be in BPM. And you'll see it change there. And within about a second, you'll see this come together. And if this had a delay, let me skip to where a delay is. I guess I could take this time to mention, I have the library on both H9s the same. Basically, I have all the delays about preset 20 and below, and I have all the reverbs at about 70 and above, so that if I need to scroll through or something, I know where those presets are roughly on either one. So if it's something I need to do on the fly that I haven't programmed a preset for, it's easy for me to go through and get those. But the whole point was, if I start doing the tempo here, you'll see it change there, it changes here, and the MIDI clock sent the information there. So during the week when I'm learning songs, or if you're a person that plays in a jam band or something like that, you're going to want to have the ability to do the tap tempo. My understanding, again, I could be wrong, but my understanding with the ES8 is that unless you set it up in this fashion, and you're even if you had a tap tempo input on here, as soon as you change patches, it changes to the tempo that the patch is saved under, which can be useful, and I'll show you that in a moment. But if MIDI clock has a way to get around that, I can change patches, and this tempo is not changing, even though many of those patches, actually every one of the patches that you're seeing here, have a tempo associated with them when they're saved. But as long as I have it in this configuration, this tempo will not change until I tap it again. Now, on the weekends, I play at a large church, and we play with in-ear monitors, and everyone has click track. So before we get there, we know what the tempos are and all of that stuff. So I program my patches with the tempos in them so that between songs I can focus on playing and getting ready and not tapping in the tempo, especially if I'm the person starting the song. Quite often I get just a few counts and I'm in, so there's not time to really tap. So the way that I do that is I reverse it now. Instead of making this the MIDI clock source, I'm going to make the ES8 the clock source. So I'm going to have to turn this back on. Make sure that's where we can see it again. Okay, so it's still on that screen because we didn't leave it. So now in this case, I want to turn the MIDI input clock on, and I want to turn the output clock off. So that means I'm done here. And if I hit this button now, it doesn't do anything anymore. And the reason why is this tempo is already set, so I can't change it from that tempo. But this isn't ready yet to be changing the tempos on its own. You see, it just still stays at the 134. I've only done half of what I need to do. So I go back to edit, back to the MIDI setting, and now the sync clock I want to turn to internal. And that's it. I'm done. So now as I change patches, we're at 140 beats per minute. Let me go, I think this one below here was quite a bit slower. See, it went to 112, and so did that. So basically what I've done is reversed this being the MIDI clock source to now this is the MIDI clock source. The difference is now I am stuck with whatever my patch BPM setting is. So if I want to go back, and this is something I do every week, or at least the weekends I play. So let's say I just finished for the weekend, I come home, I want to learn my new songs. So I go back into here, MIDI setting, sync clock to auto. I leave the clock on. I go to my H9. I turn on the output clock, turn off the input clock, and now when I tap, we're back in business. So those are the two ways to use MIDI clock and also to integrate a non-MIDI device that has tap tempo to generate a tap source for this to generate the MIDI clock, for the ES8 to receive, to transmit to your other devices. Hopefully that was easy enough that you could follow that. Post questions in the comments or on the ES8 forum if any of this was difficult to understand. Hope that's helpful. See you next time.